Welcome to the In Early podcast, where I speak to those at the forefront of the digital assets and technology sectors, telling real-life stories, considering the growth and growing pains of the industry, and exploring how blockchain and other technology has made an impact on people's lives. My name is Matt Green, and I head up blockchain, digital assets, and technology disputes at law firm Lawrence Stevens. This week I speak to Dr. Lisa Cameron, who was a Member of Parliament from 2015 to 2024. Lisa chaired the Crypto and Digital Assets All-Party Parliamentary Group, designed to promote, steer and educate MPs and stakeholders alike. Lisa is now the founder and chair of the Global Legislators Forum in Digital Assets, which seeks to coordinate lawmakers around the world and agree best practices. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First things first, thank you to Corby Hare, House of Block, for introducing us a little while ago at one of her events. She seems to know absolutely everybody, including yourself, so it was really good to sit down and have a chat with you at one of her events.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and she does great work, and we're really hoping to do some collaborations together, more so in terms of perhaps awards and different things in Parliament for this sector.
Well, let's see how we get on.
Yeah.
So you were an MP between 2015 and 2024. We're now in 2024, so until recent. Can you tell us in which area, which constituent you represented and which parties you belong to?
Yeah, so that's an interesting first question. So I'm from Scotland, you can probably tell from my accent. My constituency at the time, it's changed now, they've made it a bit smaller, but at the time I was in Parliament, it was called East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahagow. And that's where the Foreign Office is and the big tax office in Scotland. So quite a lot of government organisations there. I started in 2015, as you say. I was the first clinical psychologist to be elected to the Parliament. So lots of my constituents always said that, you know, they needed psychologists in the Parliament. So I always feel that it's been important to have mental health and those issues represented in the Parliament. So I started off out with the SNP, actually up in Scotland, who were very big at the time, right across Scotland in terms of political representation. With the last election, that's totally shifted. And I think that my journey has been quite normal in that sense, in that a lot of the population have moved from nationalist identity politics more so to probably where they started before, left or right of centre. So doing a lot of the fintech work in the Parliament over the last 3 years, working closely with government and the City Minister on the agenda on digital assets. I think I realised over time that it's actually very crucial for the economy that the UK is very integrated as a whole, and particularly that Scotland benefits from the economic progress that's made in London, and that there can be a lot of collaboration there moving forward.
Yeah, so you were SNP, then you moved parties, right?
Yeah.
And that was based on, I mean, SNP were always pro-independence, pro-Scottish, but I assume that on the basis of what you said, you were not pro-independence.
Well, I was originally. I mean, I think in 2015, a lot of people in Scotland were sort of captured by that as an idealistic possibility. And at that point, I think, I can say, I mean, with Alex Salmond and leadership of the SNP, it was a lot more centrist as a party, began to move further and further left. And then, you know, I began to have issues with some of the policy making there. But also, I would say that working in this sector in digital assets really brought home the realisation that we were working towards policies that benefited the UK as a whole. And actually that was very valuable because we all benefit from having each other within the UK. And so I moved that journey, as I say, from kind of nationalist identity politics to very much believing that the union is a very important thing for this country to go forward.
It's quite a move to go from a Scottish nationalist party. I think you were with the Conservatives after as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And was that on the basis then that you felt that that was more representative of the UK as a whole and the policies that would allow the UK to prosper broadly?
Well, I think Scotland went on a journey with the referendum, so it moved really from left or right politics to nationalist unionist politics. I think most of the population have moved on from that now to a large degree, which was shown at the last election, and it's, you know, a lot of the population have had that journey too. To be honest, nationalism hasn't, in my view, solved anything in Scotland. The health service is really on its knees there. Education has, we were so proud of that throughout our history, and it's really suffered over the past, you know, decade. I feel like things haven't improved, and therefore the whole premise that, you know, if you just have an SNP government, things will get better, is not really factually accurate. It's a bit of a failed experiment, and
So
I
it's
think
almost like drawing away from the union was isolationist and therefore didn't have or couldn't allow Scotland to fill the potential, which was working collaboratively with partners, i.e., you know, England and Wales, etc.
Yeah, so I mean, my background was in health, as I explained. So I led up the health all-party group as well during the COVID pandemic. So I was really struck by the importance of having scientific experts right across the UK who could collaborate on the vaccine development, etc. So a lot of those premises, I think, I began to revise, and then obviously moving, you know, to chair the cryptocurrency group, digital assets. A lot of that work is based in London, but, you know, it has benefit for the rest of the UK. And I think that what's happening here underpins a lot of the progress we're going to make. And we need to kind of reach out to other parts of the UK, make sure that they're involved in what's being done. And that's probably where, you know, things fell down before, that people in Scotland, people in maybe other jurisdictions, perhaps even in the north of England, didn't feel as involved as they should have.
Well, you sort of jumped to my next question.
In London
was that there seems to be some sort of disconnect, at least from here. It was seen as though almost like, you know, Scotland and the north are so far away, right? You know, when you were representing as an MP your relevant constituency, did you feel as though you were very far away, both in mindset and geographically?
I think you do feel like that when you live and you work there. Because let's face it, I mean, I had to think about this as to why perhaps the UK felt more integrated, like from my mother's generation and how her mother's generation and family's generation. Perhaps we all went on holiday in the UK more, you know, before. Like we used to go to Blackpool, we would go to Torquay, we would, you know, we would be at some point every year in other parts of the UK. Now people get on an airplane and go to Spain or somewhere else. So, you know, for years and years, they might not actually set foot over the border.
So it could be Ryanair's fault for the
I love that.
For the tabling of an independence vote, right? EasyJet, Ryanair, or the low-cost airline.
It's easy for people to then feel disconnected from what was happening in the House of Commons. And the more I was up and down to the House of Commons every week, I realised actually everyone's struggling with the same issues. And if we work together, we're more likely to solve them than if we start to split things up.
And that, I guess, falls into your general thinking and allowed you to move on from, as you say, a nationalist party to going, well, instead of being isolationist, let's work together.
Yeah.
Can I do a hard cut there because I want to move your microphone a bit closer to you?
Okay.
I'm extremely noisy, and you're much nicer, more softly. So we'll jump straight. What I'll do is I'll go into 2C, if that's okay. I'll cough first. So you've had a lot of change of government and leadership over the last 10 years or so. Do you feel, from your experience, and I don't want to talk too much about politics necessarily, but are people fed up with politics, do you feel?
I think people have begun to feel more disconnected from politicians and politics, yeah. And there's a kind of general, they don't understand our issues feeling in the country. And unfortunately, I don't think that's, you know, maybe been improving. So, you know, even just things like accepting gifts in the Parliament, which under the rules is fine because you can register that. You know, you can accept clothes and various things as
Clothes
gifts.
is the hot topic, isn't it?
Yeah, I have to say I've got all my own clothes that I've purchased here on today.
Yeah.
So things like that don't help. And I always wondered, actually, before I became an MP, I always thought, why don't they know how much a pint of milk is?
That's the
Everyone
question
knows that.
It always gets asked.
And it's always asked.
Yeah.
But then when you go down to the House of Commons, you realise that there are, cafes and places there to buy milk where it's subsidised. So, of course, it's a different price from when you go out to Tesco's or whatever. So, but things like that, I used to think, why don't they know that? And as you say, they're always going to be asked it. So why don't they even check?
Do you think the catering in the House of Parliament then are sabotaging MPs by reducing the price, making them look silly?
Well, it's a workplace and people are there for like 10, 12 hours of the day. So, you know, I mean, I think that's one of the issues, that people become isolated in a Westminster bubble. There, you know, there's a gym there, there's a hairdresser's there, there's shops there where you can purchase milk, etc. So, and your lunch, and you don't actually have to leave for anything other than to go back to, you know, your apartment to sleep and then come back the next day.
It's interesting what you said. It's almost like for the people who are travelling from far, there is a shared sentiment between you for whatever reason that is. And I wonder whether there's something that you can identify in that shared sentiment. You're travelling to London in different ways. Is it because you're further afield and you feel a certain way by being or travelling in, or was there something in that, you know, the MPs further afield felt more together?
Possibly. I mean, I think MPs, in a funny way, apart from Prime Minister's questions, which is what most people watch, and, you know, where there's a lot of kind of arguing and banter, and people love that, actually, you know. So that's one of the reasons they tune in. But behind the surface, most people from different parties get on quite well, and there are lots of friendships built, you know, between people on the left, on the right, who disagree fundamentally on some things but agree on others and find themselves working together. And actually, the all-party groups are a great way of facilitating that cross-party work that people don't often see because it doesn't often make the headlines, because people want to read about conflicts rather than consensus politics.
Yeah, the news isn't filled with lots of great things that has happened, is there? They have I think they have a special category on the BBC app news bit where they say uplifting stories. The rest is just
really
depressing stuff. I want to move a little bit more towards digital assets, and the reason I think that we're here is how did being an MP allow you to start interacting with digital assets?
Yeah, so I mean, basically at first, as I said, my background was health. I started doing a lot more health tech because I think that's really important for the future, for waiting lists and for a lot of the modernisation that we need to see, and improvements in the NHS in terms of, you know, serving the public well and making sure they have the best service possible. So I was doing some of that work, and then one of my constituents reached out and said that he had lost money via cryptocurrency scam, which I now know is a rug pull scam, but I didn't know much about it at the time. He said, could you contact the person in the Parliament who's doing this work? So I said, yeah, that's fine. I'll look for the group or the person who's in charge of this, and I'll get back to you. So I started looking, and it was in 2022. There had been no debates in the House of Commons on cryptocurrency. Yeah. That's like in the House of Commons. I think there had been some work done in the House of Lords a bit earlier than that, interestingly, but nothing in the House of Commons. And so I was like, I was struggling to find who was working on it. There wasn't an all-party group on cryptocurrency. I went back to him and said, you know, I don't think anyone is working on it. And he said, well, how do I get redress? And how do we get consumer protection? And I said, well, I was thinking, I said, I'll get back to you because I want to look a bit more into it. I spoke to a number of different members of the House of Commons, members of the House of Lords. Many were saying, well, we're not really doing that here in the UK, so we don't need to worry about that.
There was a big vacuum.
Yeah. But there was a feeling that this didn't affect people in the UK. And then I looked at the research and found that even at that point, there were over 3 million people involved in the sector.
So that's a huge level of disconnect between those who are policymakers and MPs generally thinking that actually this isn't a big deal versus what you could read objectively as statistics, which is to say that there were millions of people dealing with these assets.
Absolutely. And now I think it's near 5 million. So, I mean, it's growing like exponentially. So I had to go back to my colleagues and say, well, actually, you might say we're not doing it, but actually the public are doing it.
Yeah.
So the Parliament's behind the public. We need to catch up. And all the more reason that we need to look at, consumer protection, regulation. And so that's where I started. Then I had quite good contacts with the Swiss embassy who, I knew a lot was going on in Zug. I had a trip to Zug, and that's when I realised, yes, regulation is obviously needed for consumer protection and clarity, but it's also needed to get the best potential for investors and to make sure that the UK becomes the cryptocurrency hub that was at that point being discussed.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to that because there were quotes and statements made by governments over the years, although not in too many years. But I guess it's worth considering your sense of the government's appetite towards dealing with digital assets during your tenure as an MP. And I guess the answer is there wasn't one, and you had to take it upon yourself to kick-start some interest in this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there was also a real lack of education, and I include myself in that, and plus, the industry itself has its own kind of language as well, the way it speaks about things.
Well, certainly lawyers are trying to jump on it now, but it had been seen as something that lawyers didn't necessarily want to get involved in because it required all this new language.
Yeah.
And lawyers have to deal with enough language as it is, let alone some new language. But it seems as your entry into the sector sort of officially was as chairperson of, I'm going to get it right, Crypto and Digital Assets All-Party Parliamentary Group.
Yeah.
Tell us why that was set up and what you hope to achieve.
Well, it was set up because when I went back to my constituent, he had said, well, it's really important to me that this, is taken forward. And then I had discussions with Crypto UK, who at the time were the secretariat of the group, which was going to be formed. And they were looking for a chair. And I said, look, I'll do this, but I don't know that you'll have me long term. I want to get it off the ground. It's important to my constituents. But there might be someone better placed for this.
So actually you kickstarted it not because you had any prior knowledge, it's because you saw a gap and you thought someone needs to kick this, get some momentum going, and then I guess once you're pushing ahead, someone can fill the vacuum behind you, people who know more about the industry. Yeah,
right? Because I felt like my background was health. Yes, I had, a science background as a psychologist, but I wasn't a tech, but I mean, I have to say, my husband knew more about this sector than me because he did like computer games technology at university. So he's really interested and fascinated by it. So he was quite excited about the whole thing as well. But I didn't feel that I knew enough to be the expert in the room on it. So we all needed education. I realised actually after, doing the work in the Parliament, if I wasn't going to be doing it, it wouldn't be done. And actually I began to really enjoy it and realised I didn't have to be an expert in all the technical things.
Well, when you certainly think about it in terms of politics, you just need someone to grab the bull by the horns and get it moving, and then the technical people will follow. But I guess it was your understanding of the political procedure that allowed you to start all this.
Yeah, so we could marry the two together. I just needed to have basic understanding to start with of the issues that were being dealt with by constituents, but also by businesses, and bringing the industry into Parliament more and more, discussing on round tables, events, all sorts of different issues that were being faced by businesses trying to set up in the UK, etc. I mean, I was able to deal with that because that's basic things I can understand, and then I can impart to government. And I think actually, from telling you that there had been no debates in 2022, Greengage did a research paper on digital parliamentarians in 2024. There had been over 200 contributions at that point. So although I like to think the group was successful, I always look at the first principles and the research, and I think it shows it was successful as well.
I think it's a good discussion point to start in those relevant circles. And I didn't know that it hadn't been discussed, or at least broadly wasn't considered by an all-parliamentary group prior to that. And it is interesting that my world, which is chasing down lost crypto assets from hacks and scams, is to some extent the reason that this is here, that you started this and kickstarted it.
Absolutely.
So it's good to know that MPs are listening to their constituents when they're writing some of these things. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm hoping to have someone from law enforcement on here to discuss it, but it's certainly not being treated with the same urgency as law enforcement. So at least we're in good hands with you and the group. When you started the all-parliamentary group, was the digital pound part of this? Because that's a separate tangent of conversation. Digital pound, quite an interesting thing, but was it that, or was it generally how could the technology help the UK, or was it how can we help the technology? What was it all about?
I think it was about consumer protection to start with, because we had the FTX stuff as well happen round about then. And that was probably the best way to start off and get inroads with the MPs, because they were quite reticent to get involved with anything that had cryptocurrency in the title, to be honest. And, you know, helping people to understand this is happening anyway in the UK. We do need to have this clarity for investors, but we also need to have consumer protection at the heart of what we're doing, meant that it wasn't a group that was going to just advocate for the industry. It was going to be very balanced in its approach. And in some ways, it was therefore helpful that I didn't have a big background in the industry, because I could stand back a bit and be much more objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need some of the key personalities to get involved and push things along, which brings me to my next question was, who are some of the notable contributors to the all-parliamentary group?
Yeah, so over time we had lots of interest. Bill Wigan, one of the MPs, was very interested. He helped me to do a fundraiser, a cryptocurrency fundraiser for Ukraine during the beginnings of the conflict there. And he stayed in good contact with the group. Lord McNichol from Labour was the treasurer for a long time of the group, and he's continued to do that work in Parliament. Lord Holmes, of course, is regularly at events and speaks on AI a lot as well. And
what value adds are they giving in this group then? Because you're saying these names, but what are they actually doing? What tangible?
So they're raising questions in Parliament of ministers. Okay. They're pushing along the legislation that's required, because at the time Rishi Sunak had said he wanted the UK to become a hub. So we were looking at, well, what are the blockers to this hub? Basic things. We were out at a lot of events, a lot of conferences in London and elsewhere, listening to people who were trying to set up and scale up and thinking about their challenges, like, not being able to start a bank account. How can you be a hub if companies can't start a bank account and pay their staff?
It's one of the prerequisites of opening a bank account as a business, isn't it? Are you involved in cryptocurrency? If you are, nope, then not straight away.
Exactly. So some of these blockers need to really be looked at, and it needs to be a risk-based approach rather than a blanket approach, I think. Then other things like, how many companies were being, licensed, registered with the FCA, how long it was taking, whether there was good engagement. And then, of course, there's a huge piece on other jurisdictions and how they're tackling these issues, and can we learn from shared best practice? And actually, are there other jurisdictions who are marching ahead? And should we as the UK then be very cognizant of that? Because I think MPs kind of felt resting on their laurels. Well, the UK's a world leader in fintech. We don't need to worry about that. But actually, I think it's become an issue.
That brings me to the next question, because in April 2022, under the Johnson regime, the government published a statement, and it says, I quote, "The government has today announced moves that will see stablecoins recognised as a valid form of payment as part of wider plans to make Britain a global hub for crypto asset technology and investment," end quote, which included, and I quote, 1, stablecoins to be brought within regulation, paving their way for use in the UK as a recognised form of payment. 2, announcement part of a series of measures to make the UK a global hub for crypto asset technology and investment. 3, measures include legislating for a financial market infrastructure sandbox to help firms innovate, an FCA-led crypto sprint working with the Royal Mint on an NFT, and an engagement group to work more closely with industry, end quote. It's worth probably taking each of those in turn and to consider with you whether these things have been met at all, whether we're lagging behind. Let's start with the stablecoin stuff. Again, he said, stablecoins be brought within the regulation, paving their way for use in the UK. We've had MiCA in the EU.
Yeah.
Where are we?
Yeah, we're still in process.
We are.
Yeah, we are. And I think that's the thing. These things have taken much longer than was expected, perhaps. We've had a change of government, of course, during that time. We had a number of changes of Prime Minister. I mean, at one point I was going to events and I had discussions with the city minister then, like the month later, it was a new city minister, you're starting again, and then again, another city minister. So all of the, I think, the disruption in the political cycle has not helped these goals.
Well, it sounds like it's hindered it massively because there's no continuity. And I don't know whether that's necessarily only for digital assets. It's probably for lots of large scale industrial projects where people want things moving, and then a new government comes in and they want to change it, so nothing gets done and you get paralysed, right?
Well, I think that's a worry because from my perspective, the UK is in a great position in that it's got fantastic talent, the best universities. It's, as people will say, it's already got infrastructure as a fintech hub. We've got all the components there to make this work, but we just haven't been doing it within the time frame I would have liked to have seen. And I think some other jurisdictions are now going to march ahead with that.
I agree with that, because there's 2 where it says take measures to make the UK a global hub for crypto assets, technology and investment. There are people in this jurisdiction, friends in the industry, who have gone, do you know what? Things aren't moving quick enough here. I'm moving to Dubai. And I'm trying to say, don't do that for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. But they say we're going to do that because it's easier there and it's friendlier there and things work there. And in England or in the UK, we're coming up against too many obstacles. And that is really sad. So I guess in answer to this question, we are moving too slowly.
Yeah, and I think it's not a race to the bottom here. So, when I had discussions when I was an MP with the FCA representatives, they would say it's really important that, we don't have to be the exact first mover here. The UK is not generally the first mover. But at the same time, my argument is, but there's now been a lot of first movers and we don't want to be last. So,
in opposite to that, I guess, like people, when I've sat down with people in whether I have conversations that are recorded like this or otherwise, they say, well, we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction. We like to see in Britain how other jurisdictions do it. And then we can gather all of the positives and the negatives and create our own. Do you feel like that's a suitable approach?
Well, it seems to be the one that we generally adopt. I think there's some merit in it, in that you can learn from other people's issues and perhaps what hasn't worked, and then you can take the best bits and hopefully make it a bespoke regime that suits people. But I think because we've had so many changes, and obviously, with the new government, they have, the NHS, other issues as a priority just now. My concern is, just as you say, I've heard it, you've heard it, people are moving, businesses are moving. Those are people that create wealth in this country. They are the innovators, they create jobs, and I want to see them coming rather than leaving. So I think the whole digital asset sector will become a huge part of all economies globally, and we really need to start prioritising it more.
Yeah, and I think that, you and I have spoken about our own politics, which we won't get into here, but this is a big thing that this government needs to pay attention to. And as of yet, from where we are, I appreciate they've not been in so long, we've just had the budget. I didn't see anything relating to digital assets in the budget. Maybe I've missed something, but it doesn't seem like it's something that they're paying attention to.
I think crypto assets, there was a paper came through, a bill looking at crypto assets as property, so sort of designating it. Yeah,
but that was that wasn't under the current government.
It had already been.
Exactly.
it has already been in the works, and it was just that it continued. It was good that it continued to be announced, though, that it was seen through. So I think they want to move in a similar direction. I tried very, very hard, because these issues have become very partisan in other jurisdictions like the US, and I tried very, very hard. It's a cross-party group. The all-party group is totally cross-party, and that's the way I kept it, because I was mindful that, you know, in any democracy, governments come and go, and I want this to continue to have momentum no matter who's in government.
Too right.
So, yeah.
And I'm looking at that third point. I don't know anything about the crypto sprint. Is that a term, a phrase that you've come across? I know that you're dealing with financial market infrastructure sandbox, which we'll come on to with CodeLab, but I've not heard that term, crypto sprint. It's not part of my...
Yeah, I mean, this is work that the FCA is doing, and they are engaging with organisations, with businesses. The crypto sprint makes it sound like everything's being done very fast.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why they've chosen that wording. Right?
But I'd say it's ongoing again. And I think it's important, and the sandboxes are important, because they allow companies to innovate in a very safe manner. But again, we need to also start looking and buffering that with real life use cases. That's why I was interested. Just last month, I met with representatives from UNICEF. I was aware that they're doing a lot of work using blockchain technology to get funding to the most vulnerable.
Literally to make payments to people who don't necessarily have bank accounts.
Yes, for financial inclusion, but also to cut out intermediaries, make sure that you know, the tax dollars or pounds that we contribute to international aid goes to the people it should, which is one of the issues taxpayers raise a lot. So I think this technology has really good use cases, and we need to discuss those more as well as just having things in sandboxes that no one else really knows about.
This phrase sandbox, for those who deal with regulatory law and the companies that are in a sandbox, they're familiar with that term.
Yeah.
But for those who aren't, what is a sandbox and how does it work?
Well, a sandbox is like it's like where what it says on the tin, really. It's like, if you think of a child's sandpit, it's like basically where you're playing, you're innovating, you're trying things out, but you're doing it in a very safe way. So it is done within the sandbox rather than tested on the public straight away.
So it's like a highly monitored environment, and monitored by, I guess, in this is the FCA.
Yeah.
And transactions or whatever technology will occur within those limitations, and it will be heavily monitored to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, so it's tested out beforehand. Yeah. Interestingly, though, when I met with VARA in Dubai, they were saying they don't adopt a sandbox methodology.
No, I don't think they do. I think we're one of the only jurisdictions that does.
And I asked about that, and some of the information I was given was that often companies may find they're in a sandbox, but then it doesn't then transfer into what happens afterwards. So they're in a sandbox, and you know, I think what we therefore need to do is make sure that what's happening in the sandboxes then transforms into actual real life you know, changes and benefits for communities. So they kind of test it in a more real life form there. Yeah.
And the announcement that I referred to goes on, it says, and I quote, he also announced that the UK will proactively explore the potentially transformative benefits of digital ledger technology, DLT, in the UK financial markets, which enables data to be synchronized and shared in a decentralized way to potentially achieve greater efficiency, transparency, and resilience, end quote. Do you have any views on this?
I mean, during the time I was involved, we did have a number of bills come through, Financial Services and Markets Act, the FinProm regulations.
Financial promotions.
Yeah, financial promotions. See, there you are, I'm adopting all your jargon from the industry now.
So when people start talking in acronyms.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Yeah, so basically we did make progress. I think it's all still a work in progress, and that's why I'm really keen, because I had a check this morning and I don't think the cryptocurrency group has been re-established yet in the Parliament. And, you know, that's May, we had the election, so that's almost 6 months. and I don't want the momentum to be lost. So I really want this group to be re-established with a new chair and the work to be taken forward.
Well, I'm not entirely sure who should be taking up the mantle or how that goes about. Surely they should be contacting you, or I'm not even sure.
Well, no one's really contacted me to, ask where it was at, anything like that. We did the first inquiry report that included members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Treasury Group also did an inquiry report, which was only members of the House of Commons. So a lot of work was actually done and can be passed across, but I think it needs to be reformed before anyone would contact me about that.
Now, before I interview you, I would sit down and try and think of some half-sensible questions. And I decided to Google. I Googled UK government, blockchain, digital assets, crypto, DLT, just some standard keywords. Card cut. I don't know. I'm also worried about your time because you've got about 10 minutes. So let's go to that and I'll cut back in. I lost track of what question I was on there.
We're on this
Yeah,
one.
we were on 7.
Yeah, 7.
I started reading 8. I was like, what am I doing here? Anyway, Luke will come back in. So if you Google, as I do, I always prepare some half-sensible questions, I hope, for these talks. I Googled UK government, blockchain, digital assets, crypto, DLT in the stories of Google or just generally Google searches. And there was nothing substantive about what the current Labour government's view of digital assets was. It may well be that it's too early, but what do you think Labour will do and what appetite do you think they have to push ahead with this?
We did have a number of Labour members in the all-party group, so I feel like we did build a consensus that there is great potential in this sector. I feel probably with the new MP group, there needs to be more education again. We did a huge amount for 3 years, but now there's about 300 new MPs. So we don't know what preconceptions they have about the industry. We don't know how much knowledge or experience already exists in the Parliament regarding this industry. So all of that work has to be scoped out. And then there needs to be a further education piece. And I mean, that's no different to other parliaments. It's the same in the EU Parliament and, it'll be the same in the US as well. So this is a kind of ongoing piece of work. It doesn't end.
But we hope it's an ongoing thing, right? Someone's got to pick up the mantle.
Yeah. But, that was one of the reasons that I started the Global Legislators Forum, because we want to bring MPs who are interested from all different jurisdictions together to find out about what's happening in other jurisdictions, what's best practice, to give each other support, because I had felt quite isolated doing this work for quite a long time. At the start, no one else was really that involved. I was going to conferences, meeting with industry, but there wasn't that much involvement from other MPs.
Sort of on your own.
Yeah.
And you keep predicting my next question, which is good because it helps me flow. But my next question was, you are the founder and chair of Global Legislators Forum in Digital Assets.
Yes.
Which I understand seeks to coordinate legislators around the world to agree best practices.
Yeah.
And why did you set this up and what are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, because we did the piece of education in the Parliament. As I said, this is an ongoing piece. It has to happen continually in our Parliament, but also in the other parliaments globally. I also, realised very quickly doing this work, this is borderless. People can move to operate in all different jurisdictions, as we've said, whichever they choose to. But also, we are often talking about cross-border issues, and there has to be interoperability that's discussed. And I think some of these forums already exist for businesses and also for regulators internationally, but there hasn't been anything for members of Parliament or legislators. And we need to come together and feel supported by each other in the sector to understand that, this is global work and to share the best practice standards that we hope to see, and then to take those learnings back to our parliaments. And hopefully that will also shape the momentum in a number of parliaments moving forward, because we're all struggling with the same issues in terms of changes to legislation, changes in terms of the fast-moving pace of the industry, trying to keep abreast of it, it can feel a bit overwhelming. And I think MPs need support from each other as well, and engagement with business collectively together to know that they're working in a positive direction.
And for someone, rather than just, because you hear sort of decentralized, you think, it's some faraway person doing something, right? So that they can see that it's affecting human beings as well as something potentially automated.
And we can hear about the good use cases in different, domains as well. So I was engaged with some colleagues from Estonia, and they were telling me about blockchain technology and use in health records. And, so there's so many applications that all of this technology, Web3, blockchain, the metaverse, AI will all come together to reshape. It's not just a digital revolution that we're experiencing in terms of, I suppose, finance, which is where I started. It's going to impact sport, art, culture, health.
It already has to some extent, right? It's just...
So this is much bigger than anything we've probably seen before that's going to change the way we live our lives.
So what jurisdictions in your new initiative have sought you out or have been big contributors?
Yes, so I've got engagement with the US and also with Switzerland, as I said. Got some engagement, obviously, with EU because MiCA.
EU as a body rather than any separate member states?
Both, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been over in France quite a bit because they have a grandparenting route into MiCA, and I'm interested in the work they're doing there. Germany's doing a lot of interesting work as well. Estonia, as I said.
It doesn't seem to be homogenized, does it? I guess that's your role.
Yeah, and so that's what is really exciting about the whole thing, is really bringing together not just the advances in, business operations, but thinking about the use cases and how it can change our lives for the better internationally.
And tell us about Code Lab, because I sat down with Divyan, who's a really nice guy, of Code Lab. We did a podcast episode. It'll be in season 1, somewhere along the line. And he spoke about the role of NFTs in real estate and tokenizing real estate and selling those NFTs. And I've seen that you have become a strategic advisor to Code Lab. So can you tell us a little bit about what they're doing now, what award they won, because I understand they won an award, and what your role is?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's an award for innovation, very well deserved. The work they're doing is really exciting. And the reason I've become involved is because I've always had an interest in property as an asset. And this kind of marries together my interest in property and the property market with my interest in digital assets. And I think this is going to be massive in terms of, development. If property assets become digitalized, that will be huge. And I think the work they're doing to kind of set the scene for that and the tokenization aspect. And they also have the first tokenized apartment on the Thames as well.
They've already done it, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. They have. It's very impressive. So I'm learning a lot from them too. And my role is really about the work that they hope to do in the sandbox and, taking forward this whole issue of tokenized property assets.
So what is your role as a strategic advisor to Code Lab?
Yeah, so there might be different things that they're interested in doing that they ask my advice on. They, want to obviously continue to test things out and to look at collaborations with other jurisdictions.
So you help them navigate where they need navigating.
Yeah, so I met a number of other companies who have similar thoughts on this. When I was in Barcelona recently at the European blockchain, so connecting them to people who can help collaborate, develop this industry, and also of course if they want to engage more so with government, they might ask my advice on that, or if they want to host events in Parliament to speak to MPs or educate them about the development of this aspect of digital assets.
To some extent. And the final point is sort of brings us back to Corby, who I think wants to try and get more engagement with people in Parliament broadly, right? And wants to some extent, use you to help generate that interest.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. The work we've spoken about is she hosts fantastic events in the city, which is brilliant. But we also want to look at how do we champion this sector in the Parliament. And we've been speaking about perhaps having an annual awards for the industry, particularly women in crypto, looking at financial inclusion, looking at the kind of ways of making sure that there are more women involved in, this sector, more people with disabilities, people from diverse backgrounds, etc. So how do we facilitate that? And those are some of the issues I think that Parliament will always want to champion in financial services. So I think that's a very good fit.
Lisa, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.